Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into the heartbreaking and morally complex story of Bartholomew Kuma from One Piece. Once a feared pirate and key figure in the Revolutionary Army, Kuma made an unimaginable sacrifice to protect his daughter, Bonney. He allowed himself to be transformed into a mindless slave under the world government's Pacifista project. But here's the real question. How would Kuma's tragic decision hold up under real-world laws? What does international law say about coerced consent, slavery, and human rights violations? Today, we'll break down Kuma's actions through the lens of real-world legal principles and see where they intersect. So grab your gear and let's dive in. Kuma's motivations are driven by love, specifically his love for his daughter, Jewelry Bonney. Fearing that his past as a revolutionary leader would endanger her life, Kuma made the decision to undergo the world government's brutal Pacifista transformation. This process stripped him of his humanity, reducing him to a tool for the celestial dragons. This sacrifice is incredibly tragic. He gave up his autonomy, his freedom, and essentially his soul to protect his family. But can someone legally sacrifice their own rights and freedom to protect a loved one? And was Kuma's decision really made of his own free will? Or was he coerced by fear and desperation? Host, pause. Now, this isn't just an anime storyline. These kinds of moral and legal dilemmas happen in real life too, especially when individuals are pushed to make impossible choices. In the real world, consent is a cornerstone of legal systems. But what happens when consent is given under extreme pressure? Was Kuma's choice really voluntary, or was it coerced by fear for his daughter's safety? This is a prime example of what we call coerced consent. In international law, for consent to be valid, it must be given freely and voluntarily. Any form of duress, manipulation, or coercion can render that consent invalid. Visual, on-screen text. Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Coerced consent is invalid. In real-world law, coerced consent is not considered genuine. This is especially true in cases involving human trafficking, forced labor, and exploitation. Victims may agree to certain actions under duress, but international law protects them, recognizing that their so-called consent isn't legitimate. In Kuma's case, the emotional pressure to protect Bonney essentially forced his hand. His love for his daughter made it impossible for him to make a free, voluntary decision. In real-world legal terms, his consent would not be considered valid. Kuma's story doesn't just involve coercion. It's also a clear violation of multiple human rights. Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights explicitly prohibits slavery and forced servitude in any form. Even though Kuma technically agreed to the transformation, his autonomy and free will were completely stripped from him. He was turned into a mindless weapon, which makes it clear that his decision wasn't truly voluntary. It was slavery, plain and simple. But there's more. Kuma's right to family life was also violated. International treaties like the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights protect the family unit from being separated by outside forces. In this case, the world government manipulated Kuma's fear and exploited his love for his daughter. This led to a forced separation and destroyed their family. In the real world, international law protects individuals from these kinds of manipulations, even when family members are involved. No government or institution has the right to break apart a family or force someone into servitude, no matter the circumstances. So, while Kuma's sacrifice was out of love, it was still a violation of his basic human rights, rights that would be protected in our world. Let's talk about another major issue. Kuma's transformation wasn't just a violation of his autonomy, it also crossed the line into unethical medical experimentation. The Pacifista project essentially used Kuma as a test subject, altering his body and mind without his genuine, informed consent. In the real world, medical experimentation is heavily regulated by international laws like the Nuremberg Code and the Helsinki Declaration. These regulations require that all medical procedures, especially experimental ones, be conducted with full, informed consent from the individual. Kuma's transformation into a mindless weapon not only stripped him of his rights, but also violated his dignity as a human being. In the real world, such actions would be considered torture, not medical innovation. We've seen cases in history where medical experiments were conducted without consent, and international law now prohibits such practices. Kuma's transformation may be fiction, but it reminds us of the importance of respecting personal dignity in the real world. Kuma's story may be set in a fictional universe, but it reflects real-world issues that are still present today. Across the globe, millions of people are forced into situations where they have no real choice, whether through human trafficking, forced labor, or coercion. International laws like the Palermo Protocol and the Modern Slavery Act are in place to combat these forms of exploitation. These laws aim to protect individuals from being manipulated, coerced, or forced into decisions that strip them of their rights. It's important to remember that even when family, love, or emotional pressure are involved, coerced consent is never considered valid under international law. The law protects individuals from being taken advantage of, even in the most difficult and desperate situations. Kuma's sacrifice may seem like an act of love, but in the real world, it would be seen as a violation of his rights. His autonomy, dignity, and right to family were all taken from him. These are issues we still grapple with today, and international law works to ensure that individuals are protected from the kinds of tragic sacrifices we see in Kuma's story. Kuma's story in one piece raises deep moral and legal questions. Can love for a child justify breaking the law? And how do we balance compassion with the need to protect individuals' rights? These are the kinds of dilemmas that stretch beyond fiction and into our real world. Thank you for watching. If this episode got you thinking, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more episodes where anime and real-world law collide. I'd love to hear your thoughts.